still. Spectrum analyzers have come a long way. It lets us do more things like peak measurements, bandwidth measurements. It lets us do fancy decoding. But basically, the swept tune analysis really hasn't changed that much. What has changed, of course, is how we talk to it. I no longer have to sit in front of it. I can actually go do it remotely, which is really a big job. One of the most latest pieces of equipment we have here at Acton is something called the 89441. And this is a completely digital DSP-based, it's not swept tune, it's actually parallel tuned FFT data. What we are looking at right now is called a spectrograph. And what we're looking at is spectral density, or how much energy is on a given frequency. Now, if you bear with me, the center tune frequency in the very center of the display is 149.77 megahertz. Bell Mobility pager, they're absolutely everywhere across Canada. This span here is 100 kilohertz, so it's 50 kilohertz either side of that particular frequency. And what we're actually seeing is the two limits of the carrier as it transmits in FSK. The red indicates high RF, the blue indicates low RF, and this is a slice in time. So you're seeing a running pattern of how much energy from a top-down perspective is on that particular frequency at that time. The 89441 lets us do what's called waterfall displays, spectrograph displays, and vector analysis for the new digital system that gives us polar diagrams. So we can actually look at, and if you remember your quadrature amplitude modulation and quadrature phase modulation, and you have the polar diagram with 64 different quadrants, this thing actually maps the data points within the various quadrants and lets us calculate what's called the error vector magnitude, or what the quality of the digital signal actually is. This is really new. I'm not an expert at it. And are you an expert yet?
Nope.
We've had a couple of weeks of training, and one of the guys here has sort of taken this on as his job in the spectral or vector analysis, and it's sort of his baby right now. It's extremely expensive though. As you see it here, it's about $150,000, and that doesn't include. In fact, it didn't include a couple of manuals, and it doesn't include the rack mounts.
No kidding. That's extra.
That's extra, yeah. And that's because the help on this thing is all built in. It actually has an HTML-like help built right into it.
But if you buy something like this, does Hewlett-Packard provide you a training course now, or whoever this is made by, and say, here's our equipment, come on down, we'll show you how to operate this thing?
No.
It's extra.
That's extra.
That's extra.
$150,000 gets the extra.
But they do have like courses available?
Well, actually, they custom design a course for you.
Okay.
We actually had one of the HP representatives come out here for 2 days and give us hands-on intensive training, just us three guys and him, on how to run it. And it's just like having one of the engineers from HP right beside you. He was very good.
Unless you have that information, you could have features built into there, and you have no way of knowing that they're even there or accessing them.
For you computer geeks, it actually has a built-in FTP server to store data. Yeah. So actually I store a trace, I FTP to it to get the trace data back out, and then I actually have a dynamic, a Windows application that I can replay the trace. You can actually record an emission right off air and play it back. So that if you didn't know what you were listening to, you can actually store an emission right to disk and then replay it time and time again while you're doing your analysis. It's extremely powerful. There's that feature alone makes it worth the money. I mean, you have to think of the technology involved in being able to record an emission, whatever it might be, and then replaying it.
Where do you spend the majority of your monitoring time? Is it in cellular? Is it in commercial radios? Is it
we spend very little time in cellular. Most of this is private commercial stuff.
Yeah. Between
138 and 174, 406 to 470, and then 806 to 960. That's where you spend about 70% of your time, if you're looking for things to do. VHF and UHF is where most of the problems are, because we started making assignments back on those bands before we really knew what we were doing. I know it sounds terrible, but back in the 60s and early 70s when VHF and UHF communications got popular, our EMC modules and our assignment procedures weren't really mature. And now, 25 years later, we say, well, we can do so much better job. You can look at the 800 megahertz band. I mean, you don't have any trouble at 800 megs, hardly at all. I mean, you have a bunch of 15-watt mobiles running around with great coverage, and it works fine. I look at the cellular system. The cellular system works great.
Yeah.
This is a point of interest. Anybody know when the cellular concept first came out?
Back in 52, I think.
1938.
38?
1938, the
I was
cellular
around then.
concept. Do you know when the technology was available? 1974. They could have had cellular radio in 1974, but we didn't have any spectrum.
So why do we have the spectrum now, or did we go through a process of moving things out in order
Remember when
to create our window?
Channel 79, City
Yeah.
TV, got moved to 57? That's when we got the spectrum, because the world agreed that we'd lose those upper UHF TV channels. There's another pop quiz. When was the first VHF repeater used? The Radon Dieppe, 1942.
In 1942.
Yep, that was the first VHF repeater when anything above 30 megs was considered not really usable in frequencies. I thought it was kind of cute. A little piece of radio trivia for you.
Get now.
I'll probably pop a fuse if I don't turn this one off before I do this.
We got 110 coming into the building.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't pay the bill this month. This is a Hewlett-Packard 8568B, and this is what we call a swept tune device. It's not a vector analysis at all. I'll find another antenna here.
I'm finding that some of the stuff, like not in the sophistication that you've got, obviously, but there's a development of more and more software where you can do an output of a receiver into a PC, and suddenly you're getting an awful lot of information that's displayed on
Oh yeah,
your ordinary
Yeah.
286 anymore.
definitely, definitely. The amount of software and digitization going on is incredible,
Yeah.
and it's really tough to choose where you want to go with it. This old device here is actually quite old. It's about 12 years old, but it's another one of our workhorse spectrum analyzers, and shows you the classic difference between the two of them. This one has the equivalent of about 5 Pentium 200 MMX processors in it, with about 256 megs of RAM. Essentially, that's how it runs. Whereas this one's actually Motorola 68,000 based. And you can see right away just by looking at this display that the interpretation of the information is completely different. But it works, and it's one of those things that you can't do without when you're in the spectrum monitor management business. Another, it's a Roden-Schwartz signal generator. It's what we just use for calibrating the various devices when we want to see exactly how on we are. This is called a Roden-Schwartz ESM. And to tell you why we buy this type of stuff is that although this radio's replacement cost, because we actually have its big brother now, it's called the ESN, this radio costs about $130,000. This one was purchased in 1976. And since 1976, it's been down twice. And the first 15 years of its life, it was never turned off because this was actually a 24-hour-a-day operation. In the last 10 years, I've replaced a bridge in the power supply once. And we sent it out for Cal about a year and a half ago, and that was the first time in about 12 years it had been out to Cal, and it wasn't off. It came right back.